I love it. You know, I love it. Handheld reminds me of my karaoke days to Right, yeah. And 314.
It can't be right. I think it has to be right. It can't be 5 minutes. There's no way. I'm not.
I know. I may flip through these, Kevin. All right, this works. Okay, welcome. No, I know, it's good. I'm sorry.
I did not expect those things. Just labeled as that.
I know, always like when you're the last session and you're upstairs, it's always a little
No,
nerve
I'm
wracking.
tomorrow, the very last session, so I'm not expecting very many people.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started, realizing we are your last session of the day, and it's been a really good, intense, packed day thus far. So hopefully we'll end you on a note of action potentially. Also, we'll say that this session has some interactive activities like you can do we'll do at your table. So hopefully we'll get you thinking in some different ways. But yes, welcome to Despite Best Intentions and Unraveling the Mess Using Strategic Questions to address systemic challenges in special education. So welcome and introduction. So I am Jana Rossborough, and I am with Limestone Education based in Kansas. I did this last time for a couple of folks who would be familiar. I say Lawrence, Kansas, and I just pause and see if I get any rock chalks.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Get a couple back there. We have a big game this weekend against K-State. We're going to dominate. It's going to be amazing. And then my brief history, I started off as a secondary social studies, special education teacher. Then I ended up going to law school, worked in Chicago Public Schools and their legal team during law school. Then I did a quick stint as an attorney for the Missouri Highway and Transportation Department. That was a lot of death on the roads. And I know a lot about roads, but I got like scared to drive because it was just accidents, a lot of accidents. And so I ended up going back to education and joined the Kansas State Department of Ed as an attorney, and then was an assistant director of early childhood special ed and title services. Then went to West Ed, where I did some work at the national centers. So I've been to almost all the states and always say y'all are different in unique ways, but it's amazing too the similarities that like exist, especially as we talk about like the systems level, right? And thinking about those challenges you all are facing, a lot more in common. And then finally I started my own business and have been still supporting some states and some districts, but also deeper into the dispute resolution, which has been a really nice re-entry into this world, right? That, is complex and messy and really highlights how much or how important questioning is. I remember with my attorney training, in Chicago Public Schools, I had gone through a hearing and I was an intern, right? So the supervising attorney comes in with me and I left after doing all of this questioning in a hearing, and Jim pulls me aside and I was like, how was it? Was I okay? And he's like, you know what? you'll always get better at questions, right? You can always ask a better question. And so that's always stayed with me. And so this idea of diving into strategic questions really was the excitement or the ad here to have this discussion with you all today. And I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Hi, everyone. I am Kevin Davis. I am with Pittsburgh State University officially. They have me contracted out to the Kansas Department of Education. I am the co-director of their technical assistance and professional development system for both IDEA and ESEA. So we have 14 contracts that do all types of support to families and school districts. I am a recovering school psychologist. I early years, in that 97 reauthorization time, I built the Kansas MTSS model framework at that time. And so I've been doing the systems level work quite a bit of time, and getting a chance to partner with Jan on this is fun.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, it's great. We're really excited about this today, and hopefully this will be a place that we'll get to go deeper and get you all thinking and processing. And I Kevin pointed out too, is that I think a lot of the other sessions rightfully are on this idea of kind of prevention, like ahead of the game, right? How to get there and how to intercede before something happens. Ours is a little bit of like, okay, it's already happened. So what do we do now? So this will kind of be a little bit more after the fact in terms of its orientation. So we will, on our session objectives, look to view special education through a systemic lens to understand interconnected challenges, gain insight into the nature of complex systemic issues and how they impact student outcomes, and then learn a process of identifying actionable steps and solutions to address complex challenges, driving progress and improving educational outcomes. Just try to read those verbatim, and that this is what we're hoping to do today. But you can see kind of the theme here, or what pulls through, and this idea of interconnectedness, the complexity, right? And that place of really how we're going to lean into thinking about questioning to hopefully, again, unravel the mess. So starting with a definition, and this is how we're approaching strategic questioning in terms of defining it, is that strategic questioning really aims at saying, like, what is the actual problem, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're seeking to do through strategic questioning is we're not just asking questions to ask questions, and maybe even with a solution in mind, right? We're actually asking questions to uncover what is the actual problem that is having an impact here. What actually happened? And then getting to that place too, like, of what is underneath the action. Again, pushing against that idea that we kind of know everything. We're asking questions just to kind of fill in, the area around it. This is a place where we're using our questions to advance us, hopefully to a place where we can intervene in the system and drive improvement. The third one, on how do policies, procedures, and practices interact? This one, in terms of thinking about the strategic questions, is really a place where we're seeing gaps. I don't know, lack of a better word, and not so much in policies and procedures, and that, like, a lot of times districts and schools, states have really, really solid policies and procedures. It is where we get into the implementation of the practices, right? It gets to this idea of sometimes what is put forth that when we only discover a problem, like when it gets to a complaint level, right? Or something's brought up, and then thinking about, okay, that is one place to intervene, and thinking about systems, that is not one individual. So saying that if it wasn't one individual that wasn't doing a practice, but what is the system that led to it? And how did we not know about that problem before it rose all the way to a level of a complaint, right? So how does this all interplay? And then where is the readiness for change? So we'll hit that too, because change is tricky. And change is something that I think a lot of people say, like, I love change, right? But when pushed on some of those pieces, we love aspects of change. We love pieces of change. But real change is a change, right? And then there are different levels of folks' readiness or availability or even understanding the need for change. So we'll dive into all these pieces through strategic questioning. I'll go to, if you were, I know I saw some of you in my last session, I love an iceberg. So we've got another iceberg here. It's a different iceberg. It's a third iceberg. But like the reality check too is when we're approaching situations and we're trying to unravel the mess, something has happened, right? Despite our best intentions, we are in a situation that is causing stress to the system. It's leading to a non-desired outcome. That challenges rarely stem from those bad intentions, right? We're taking sort of the idea too in systems work that it isn't one bad actor, that really it's a system that is permitting those actions to occur. I like to use, is there anybody named Bob in the room? No, no Bobs. Okay. I oftentimes will walk into a situation and when corrective action has been issued and a plan will be developed by the school or the district to address an area of compliance. And they'll say, look, we're going to put training in because training's the number one go-to. A lot of times as we get to the school or the district level, we'll put training in. But you know what? It's not actual training. It's actually Bob, right? And so if we could just wait out Bob to retire, all of this would get solved. And generally, like that's not, again, kind of circling back to that idea that it's not one particular actor, right? We're thinking about the systemic piece. And then also that idea that most of the folks in education are not stemming from a place of bad intentions, right? That like, even if we see it all the way in a lawsuit all the way up, there could be bad interactions between folks, but rarely do you see a case where the school system and or the parent is deliberately trying to cause direct harm. You know, I mean, how I'm defining harm, I guess I'm seeing it, right? Like, or causing like, lasting bodily or emotional injury. And that, I mean, that could be something that happens, throughout the course or dragging on like a long lawsuit or your protracted sort of involvement in conflict. But most of those places, they rarely stem from there. It starts with, I want to advocate more for my kiddo. I want to advocate more for this student. And or the school or the district saying we're trying to do the best we can, right? We're trying to do those interventions. Visible problems are just the tip. And this speaks to the root cause analysis. And that often, right, that idea of not getting right into solutions is that what we can see is just the top of it, that it has a place under here. You have patterns and trends, you have structures and systems, you have mental models, right? All of these things sort of underneath the surface. And if we just address what is here at the tip, we often miss like so much more, right? That is undergirding it. How I came to naming my company Limestone Education is that I would go into districts and I'd do some work around RTI or MTSS, and I'd come in and I'd be doing this work, right, about systems improvement, and I'd be asking all these questions, like getting their grounding assumptions, right? We'd be setting vision statements. We'd be trying to like unpack like what's happening in the district. And I remember these principals sitting there, and finally one raised his hand and was like, can't you just give us a plan? Like, he was like, one, like, why can't you just give it to us? And I was like, fair question, right? I have a plan I could probably do. But if we don't address what's underneath the foundation of the house, like I can give you a new color of paint, but if your house is going to tip over, it doesn't matter if it's red or blue. Like, it can look nice and shiny for a little bit while that house is standing. But if we don't address what is underneath here, I was like, I'll just be out here 6 months later having this exact same conversation with you all, because it'll work for a while. You'll implement it. But goodness, we're going to probably get there if we don't address this. And this is the same with almost all problems, right? It's what you see is only the tip of what is actually happening underneath there. And then finally, problems come bundled, technical and adaptive. How many of you have heard that terminology before? I'm seeing head nods, seeing a couple hands. Okay, so technical is like, it's the black and white, right? It's the written word. It's like, it's pulled out straight. Like it is really, we can all look at it. We can see it. It's the policies and procedures, right? It is written. It is clear to understand. It is a violation, right, of regulation. You can see it, right? We know what a regulation states, and we're like, this is what is impacted by it. Adapted is much more tricky. It's the messy part. It's the human part. Adaptive is the deepness, right? It's what makes all of this work happen and be so complex and require, right, the unraveling of the mess, and makes it that much difficult because humans are messy. Kevin, do you have any?
No, I was just thinking that kind of reflecting back like on this this afternoon's lunch presentation. She said they're talking about the relationships and how you communicate and everything. These strategic questions get down to the bottom there at those mental models of, because it's the mental models that we're bringing into the situations that's causing people to stray from the structures, the policy practices, procedures. It's like there's an enabling context or mental model that is coming in there somewhere that is breaking down, that is preventing that good communication, those good relationship building. And so what we're trying to do is like, okay, we've had things have went south. We should have been preventative. What can we learn from this? And so this is our chance to take a step back and say, hey, what type of questions and how do we get down to that deep level of what are the mental models, what are the enabling context that's happening within our system that allowed this to occur, and us not be able to stop from getting here.
Yeah. All right, so let's dive in. So we have a framework that we're going to work through today, and we're going to take a scenario sort of all the way through this framework to dive a little bit deeper into strategic questioning. And the first one is to identify bundled problems. So we'll start there. So again, strategic questioning, a place that it starts from is defining a problem. And this also harkens back to improvement science, right? Sort of thinking through whether you're kind of Carnegie or you go the implementation science route or just general continuous improvement. All of these pieces and places will start with this idea that identifying the problem is critical for us to be able to kind of get to the right next step or where to explore. This is one of my favorite quotes from the improvement science world, is that we fail more often because we solve the wrong problem than because we get the wrong solution to the right problem. And then that, right? So thinking back to that iceberg, if we're just solving that very top, or we're thinking about that principle and one of my trainings, right? That was like, just give us the plan. That would have been a solution, but it was a solution to the wrong problem. And so it would have worked for X number of days, but we would have ended up again back at the same place. So holding this as a truism, it is then critical that we spend some time on the problem. So a problem should be something you care about. Always should be something you care about. Should be a barrier to your organization's priorities, should be within your control, should be regularly occurring, is the right level of specificity, and does not include an implied solution. So in thinking about something that like you're diving into, a mess has occurred, right? And we're looking to unravel the mess. We've got to identify a place to kind of start here. And these are parameters in terms of defining where the problem should lie as a good place. Because spending time to unravel a mess of something that had just happened once was a complete fluke, right? Never is going to repeat itself. You probably don't need to spend the time, energy, and resources on that. But if it's something that's hitting all of these things, right? And then it resulted in something that disrupted your organization, your school district, interrupted a kiddo's education. This is something to spend the time and the energy around. So here is a scenario that we're going to put forth to you all and have you identify what are the problems that you see in this scenario. And again, we have the definition of sort of what problems should be on the side to like use, right? You're going to have to utilize like a little bit of where you come from in your context to probably make assumptions for some of these pieces, but wanted to keep that up there as some guidance as well. So we're using the word autopsy, which I know, I apologize if that is a triggering word for anybody, but thinking about that this has already happened, right? So we're diving into this after this has already happened. So we're taking a look at what has been experienced. So in this scenario, Aiden is a fourth grade student with an IEP for reading and written expression. Aiden receives 45 minutes of daily specialized reading instruction with a special education teacher. This year, the district adopted a 90-minute literacy block for all fourth graders, co-taught by 2 general education teachers. The new schedule eliminates the pull-out reading time and instead includes occasional in-class support from the special education teacher. After 2 months, Aiden's reading progress has plateaued. Parents are concerned, and the special education teacher has expressed that her time is stretched thin due to the new schedule. So we'll give you some time. There are Post-its on your table as you can do it as an individual, you can do it as a table, is to generate the problems that you see in the scenario. 1 problem per Post-it, please. And again, that guidance is there on what kind of problems should be. So we'll give you a little bit time to work on this.
You're so good at it. You're good at it.
Okay. We'll come back together. So we've, if you can see my hand, please raise your hand. Great, thank you. Okay, so now in the next minute as a table, I want you to find your 2 favorite questions. Your 2 favorite questions. Because I love questions. I want the best ones.
Yeah, and then, all the other kids.
Developing language.
Whether they
Okay. Come back together, please. Thank you. Okay. Which table wants to share their 2 favorite questions first? Do you all have 2 favorite questions?
Oh, okay. We said, like, what is the reason, why did you make this decision? How did this come about? How did you decide this? And then the other one we have is, how are other students who previously received pull-out services for the same thing? How are they progressing? Are they having the same issue?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Can I get that first question again? I'm sorry.
How did they decide on this? Like, why did this change come about? Like, what was?
To put the 90-minute block.
Okay, so they would be like the district. How did
Change the policy or, yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Why did the district adopt this for everyone rather than just? Yeah.
perfect. And then how are other students being impacted? So when I asked that question, perfect. Thank you.
We had one as far as, what is the student getting for written expression? I mean, the IEP says it's for reading written expression. So when is Aiden getting the written expression support?
Okay.
And then the other question along the lines of the schedule, but how do you schedule for all the kids that have IEPs and guarantee that they get their services?
Yeah. That one, narrow and then a little bit broader systemic, but also that narrow one too probably leads down a rabbit hole of potential other places to explore. Yep. Like that.
Excellent. Thank you. This table?
I think ours were pretty identical to theirs.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the one that we have, yeah, how is the decision made to change this schedule and what data was used to support it? And then how is this new schedule impact the teacher's capacity to support the individual students?
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and that's you've shifted that talking about the teacher capacity and understand that system as well. Yes.
So ours are somewhat related, but the first was describe how the special ed and gen ed teachers co-plan to determine the skill deficits identified in students. And then the follow-up is how do they determine the accommodations that are needed by everyone within the class?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent questions. Anything from this table?
A question that one of our table members had that really stood out to me was, do we need to consider whether the student is in the right LRE at this point in time? And similar in terms of like consultation between and collaboration time between gen ed and special ed.
Great, thank you.
Great.
This table? You-
We talked about what is the plan when there isn't progress? What are you going to do moving forward? And are you using consistent measurements? Are you comparing apples to apples with the progress?
Great questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
This table?
We primarily had a lot of the same questions, but so I'll just list one of them. And what process is in place to ensure that students with disabilities are receiving their services?
Great, thank you.
It's a great question.
And this table? Any questions?
Ours were also mostly similar, but one question that we had was how and to whom was this decision communicated? Like, what was the timeline between communicating this change and who received that information when?
Okay, great, thank you. Those are great questions. So a final question for you all is, does anybody have a question that is wildly different than what has been proposed that might shift the thinking?
23 years as a special ed director. And I've had teachers that are brand new and on an alternate pathway that have not had any training in how to provide reading instruction for kids. So they might have the certification, but they don't know what to do with the kids. So you have to get creative. Like maybe one of those gen ed teachers is also a licensed special ed teacher that does know how to do that. So then I would be looking at, where's that child going to get that SDI?
Okay, great, thanks. Any other wildly different questions that might shift the thinking?
One question I had was just like, is there any other time in the schedule of the day that could be utilized for pull-out time, even if it's not during that 90-minute block?
Okay. Excellent.
Kevin behind.
I was going to say, how is Aiden feeling and how are the other children feeling or reacting to this? What is their impact?
Great question.
It's somewhat similar to what you said, but just what is the team's understanding of what reading remediation is?
Great question. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I always am impressed, like when we get like what is a pretty, like not much text up here, but where you can go in terms of like seeking out both those kind of child level or student level questions to address what is going on with Aiden in this scenario, but then also pulling out and thinking about, right, what are those district decisions that are happening both in terms of this policy, this massive change to schedule, but also in terms of, you know, these two general education teachers, who are they? What do we know about them? You know, and then what do we do moving forward? Like, what is the plan? Is there something else in place? And what data do we need? Sort of all of those different pieces coming in terms of strategic questions. So no, appreciate this so much of all the questions that came in around the scenario. We developed a couple, and I don't think that they're going to be wildly different from yours in terms of like potential questions to ask. And, you know, one of them was around the compliance angle, like what legal policy requirements apply to the delivery of Aiden's IEP services, and how do these intersect with the new district literacy block schedule? That was one. I think that that was covered in some of the different questions sort of teased out there. The other one was on systems and communication. How are gen ed and special ed staff coordinating to ensure IEP services are implemented consistently across all subject areas? And the third one was resource and capacity, like what structural or resource barriers, time, staffing, technology are preventing consistent delivery of services, and what system level changes could remove them. But, you know, in the theory of questions, right, I know the saying, right, there's no bad questions, and there really aren't in terms of being able to put those forward. There's questions that give you more additional insight. Some can be better than others. But all that we heard come out here all further sort of this understanding of what is presented in the scenario. So this is happening. This happened. It definitely probably at this point is not a crisis situation, but I don't know yet. We don't have that information. If something happened after it that escalated it to something that would be more crisis. But there are definite implications in here, right, that could lead you to believe that this was an issue that had both individual and those systemic components. And thinking about then how that does impact what you choose to do next, and thinking about potential next steps. Because developing actions for change is the last one with the action framework. We're asked on the last one too, like the problems that, unpacking and writing the strategic questions around. How do you know that they're actually the problem? And I think that is a great question, right? So those are the problems surmised from the scenario. I think there's some that are probably a little bit more clear cut. Like we can surmise here that Aiden's not receiving his daily specialized reading instruction or implementation of at least a part of Aiden's IEP, which problematic. But we don't know, right, in terms of any of, especially the systemic ones or ones that extend beyond that, if they're the right problem. What should also help too is with your strategic questions, as you investigate those, as you dive into those, it should help you learn more about your problem and if you are on the right track. Because again, that problem is key to getting you to a place for potential action and or improvement within your system. So developing an action for change. And in reflecting on this, right, maybe it should be just developing an action, because but all actions have a change. Because I'm going to guess maybe based on some of the questions developed that this may not be something that rises to the level that we would define as a change, but may rise to the level of having an action to take a next best step. Because, right, moving from those questions into action, we're going to ask you to identify a best next action for the team. And I don't think it has to be centered in change. We're just going to talk about change next. but possible places to begin. And this starts to get back into this idea around improvement science. So you have been a team of, 2 or a team of 4 or a team of 1, right? And looking at this, using your best perspective, you are seeing your cross section of the iceberg based on what you send, where you sit. These next places to begin or for possible actions are probably your next best step as it looks to unraveling the mess, right? Of like learning more. Do you need to do empathy interviews? Anybody familiar with empathy interviews? Seeing some hands. Yes. So empathy interviews are basically talking to those who have experienced the problem the most. Right. I've heard some of that, like in the next questions, like, how does Aiden feel about this? So going in, talking to those folks that are experiencing the problem, probably talking to the special ed teacher, what are you doing with your time, right? Talking to those 2 general education teachers, having some of those interactions and learning more about it. Empathy interviews is a place to begin. The data component will help give additional understanding into that. How is this policy impacting the rest of the kids? We found Aiden. Is Aiden, a red herring that it is just Aiden that's experiencing it? Or is it a bigger, sign of something that is more systemic? We're going to need to look at the data in order to know that, right? If this is limited to Aiden or it's bigger. The other one, a possible place to begin as a next step would be a process map. And so what a process map does is like something happens, right? And then you're like, if this happens, then this happens, and this happens, and here's a decision point, then this happens, and this happens. The critical piece with process maps, and this is just a given, right, is you have to draw the process as it actually happens. You can't create the process and drawing the process map that you wish was happening. So if you were looking at that communication, for example, from the district to the schools, how much time were they given? That could be a place to do a process map and be like, those decisions are made in superintendent's council. And then that is communicated to here, right? Then it goes to here for implementation here, right? Or however it would go, that could be a place to start. So I want you to take one of those questions and say that if you did go to those questions, you're like, this is the key question. Kevin had you identified 2 of your favorite questions and then some wild questions. But one of those questions, right, that you highlighted for us, what would you do? What would you need to do to be able to find out the answer to that question? What would be your best next step to try to find out the answer to that question? Who would you need to talk to? What would you need to see? What would be your next step to actually figure out an answer to that question? Choose one of your questions or a couple of your questions and identify that next step. Okay, last popcorn of the day. We'll get an idea of a couple actions based on questions. Just to hear, how are you going to advance your investigation to learn more about, what is happening in the system or with the students?
We talked about, we think the next best step would be empathy interviews for all the folks that are involved as far as like, what was your understanding why this was rolled out? Probably recognizing like there may be teachers that had no idea it was coming, and definitely the special ed teacher didn't know, it would unveil kind of themes and patterns that might cause folks to think.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have?
I have a question around that. I'm not in the school system, so this is a little bit foreign to me, and I'm just trying to better understand it. I'm in Part C world. And I know that I do dispute resolution, and the minute I start asking people and doing any type of interview, people start freaking out and getting very defensive. And then it creates, and I can be as gentle as I can, and I can frame it in the most softest way, but it still comes across as, they are questioning us. And I'm just wondering what people do in response to that.
So, if it's available, so I try to be strategic. So like I'm part of an improvement science collective, and I will use someone else I work with that's an unbiased party if that's an option. So I say, hey, would you mind asking these questions so it doesn't feel judgmental? She's not part of our department, those kinds of things. We've done it in our department for other things in the past because the California Department of Ed required empathy interviews and some of the in the past for like disproportionality or intensive monitoring. And as the county office, we did empathy interviews on behalf of the school district so that we could get honest, transparent information, but they're still high emotion. Typically, I think that's why they're called empathy interviews it can be really painful for people to talk about their experience in feeling like a loss of control or it was done to them. But I do think if you can be strategic, that's the best way.
Great, thank you.
We talked about doing a process map for basically the compliance issue to kind of look at what their process is to ensure that they are being, or that they're having a process for compliance for all the IEPs and kind of seeing what this changed, what unintended consequences essentially came from this change and looking at that.
Great, thank you. Oh.
Hi, my name's Julia and I'm a ombuds person, and I would say I really like empathy interviews. But I've learned to be really delicate in how I go about them. So it's a lot more of like, hey, can we, and my work is very informal, so I have some flexibility there, but it's a lot more of when I'm talking to a new principal or a new teacher, like, can you tell me more about, like, I'm interested in finding the backstory. I know there's another side to this. Tell me more. What's your understanding of? And that can tend to sometimes get me in the door a little bit farther. The other thing that really helps me is having a principal or someone else preface my conversation so that the person knows they're not in trouble. That we're there to gather information and that we're there to support. Because once we know the backstory or the additional, then we know where we can provide aid.
We talked a lot about data collection, particularly in how the new schedule has impacted like student performance, like across IEPs. But then we also talked about like, for students, it might be hard to get like good data from an empathy interview if they're like in fourth grade. So like looking at observation or like behavior data, for example, to kind of get an idea of how this change has impacted them.
Thank you.
I wanted to speak more to the Part C world because it's a very scary transition for parents to go from Part C to Part B. And so we try to give them lots of information, which is overwhelming. So you have to balance that. But usually when a parent asks questions, in an IEP meeting, I always acknowledge that's a great question. Because I'm on the receiving end of frustrating parent phone calls, and I try to arm them with information like, I know this is overwhelming for you. I'm also a parent of a now adult child, and a grandchild whose IEPs haven't been implemented at times. So I've had to be at that side. But I always ask parents, write down your questions before that meeting. So that way, when you leave there, you have the answers to those questions because it gets overwhelming. I encourage them to bring somebody. And I said, and maybe send those ahead of time so everybody's prepared. But I've also, we make a lot of assumptions. And so I try to break down what their question is and say, sounds to me like we need to give you a rundown of your child's schedule for the day. And for newer teachers, they get defensive because it's like, well, I'm doing blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, then let's just explain that. And if we're wrong, I'll say, you're right. Like, we should have done this differently, and I'm sorry. But I've done this for a long time, too. So it's also liberating for the parent to know we're not always right, type thing.
Sure. Well, yeah, and I will say too, because you mentioned complaint investigation, right? And I mean, I would say I do complaint investigation for Part B, and I definitely, right? Like, I think that is one of the hardest pieces is everybody is on edge when they're called into those interviews, right? To learn more. And I do think, I don't know if there's an answer for like the complaint investigators other than, right, like, I mean, we probably have tried all of it in terms of, right, trying to make it. But I oftentimes think in terms of like supporting those folks like behind the scenes, and that's for both the parents and for like the school folks that are being called into interviews, but especially about kind of the school folks, I guess, in this one too, is sometimes I think probably working through like the complaint and having those conversations around and answering. I mean, they won't know exactly what questions I'm going to ask them, but there's probably some things like if that was a complaint filed on Aiden, there's some pretty obvious questions that I think would come up that as a complaint investigator, this would be something I would probably ask. I would ask the principal, like that's always usually somebody I talk to is the principal. And then I talk to the teachers that are involved and the special education case manager. And I'm going to talk to the parent. And I'm going to talk to maybe someone at district as well. If the parent has said, look, they changed it. I'm probably calling somebody in for that too. So I think probably thinking through those questions, not to get your answers all aligned, but to understand what you're going to be asked about. I will oftentimes think like that could be helpful. I know it's a time game and it's stressful regardless if like anybody's coming into those interviews because it feels like a judgment. But I often wonder too of how if right any of those just even reflecting on sort of everything that had happened, if those happen as conversations, I can't ask them, but that would be advice I'd give them. Yeah. I don't know if that happens in the Part C world too. I don't have a good answer for that, but I think that complaint investigation was definitely top of mind too, and developing some of these in terms of informing even our scenario and where to go with potential actions.
Yeah, because there's one of those weird things that like I said earlier, while we're talking about so much of today, yesterday, talking about the getting ahead of it and preventing it and mediation, this we're saying, okay, it's happened. There's no we need to stop blaming, and it's like let's take a step back and figure out what do we look at. And my first entry into improvement science was through Association of Talent Development, their human performance improvement, which is they're the groups that like Caterpillar, Walmart, all those companies use, and they look at it's like if we have an employee that's not performing, making the widgets, answering the telephone, it doesn't matter what it is, doing delivering the IEP. There's like 5 areas. They're like, do they not have the knowledge to be able to do it? Do they not have the skills to be able to do it? Do they not have the resources, whether it's time, money, materials, whatever? Do they, what is the environment and context? Does that prevent them from doing that? Or, even the other teachers in the building, oh, honey, that's not the way we do it here. Or that's not what we do, not the way we done it. And then you do have the final one, which is a motivation, which is an individual HR type solution. But usually most of your problems that you're going to run into in your system are going to fall into that resource environment context that we set up in our system. That's where our failures happen. ATD believes that less than 20% of the problems that you have with human performance, that people not performing at the level you want, 20% of them can be solved with training. They're like that few of them, that knowledge and skill causes 20% or less of the problems that we typically have. It is because of we don't give them the resource to be successful. We're not giving them the environment to be successful. is the primary where we need to be looking and working. Does that make sense? So. How long does this take? It depends how big and ugly and hairy it is.
Yeah. I mean,
I think a lot of the corporate levels is understanding, and sometimes stuff like this can go on for months.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, you know, in the education system, you know, and again, everybody's time is very precious, you know, whether you're talking administrators, teachers, parents, whatever. And I'm just thinking on average to do this and to, what's the name of this thing? Clear
Yeah.
up this mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get to this mess, identify it, and then work on fixing it. How long does it take?
I think that is a perfect question, and I'm not going to have it. I'm going to look at that. I'm going to skirt at this a little bit because I think really this probably gets to this idea about readiness for change. Because what happens oftentimes is like, for example, if the state comes in and makes a finding that an IEP file review and says, okay, your goal isn't measurable. A lot of times the district will be like, or the LEA will say, yeah, right, it's this teacher, but we'll develop an individual corrective action plan. We'll correct that student. Our district corrective action plan, a lot of time will be training, but in their mind, they're like, hey, that's actually just Mrs. Miller down the hall. It's her problem. It wasn't systemic, right? In terms of like the response. Because I do think when change comes from outside, it's way harder to get everyone on board for the readiness to change. And I think that's important for your question. Because if that district in Aiden's situation said, oh my gosh, like, holy smokes, right? We could have not only Aiden, if we pull the data, we have all these kids. We created a massive mess and we want to get ahead of it. And they're ready to do it, I think change can happen quickly. I think if they are like, and it goes in, or this gets really localized to one school, and or it never rises to the level of complaint, or something doesn't prompt, you could have a district that does recognize it on their own and is like, oh my goodness, we need to figure out a different way. Or some things may be changed at one site versus like a whole systemic, makeover. I think a lot of it depends on this readiness for change, because if there's not recognized that it is a problem, I mean, we all don't like, it's way harder to get me to change my behavior if you point it out to me and I could be like, versus if I notice it about myself. I think that's just human nature. Also, if you can't make the case that what's in it for them, like we've always said that about change, the number one question people will ask when you say, we're going to do something different, in their heads, we'll all do it, is what does this mean for me? And unless you have a good answer for that, and the answer for like doing a major systemic change, whether it be in industry or it be in education, if we can't explain why that's a benefit, that it gives back people resources and time, it makes their job easier, it makes them happier, it increases their motivation, it is really hard to sell change. And then putting those into place to do that large systemic work, I mean, it's already a long and intense process. And I say long and intense, I think like true change, like you're kind of looking at 3 years to really have it take, but you can put things in place before that. It's just to see if it is actually going to sustain and actually create change. But, this case has to be made. So we have these pieces of like building readiness before change, strengthening relationships, document what and why, and keep the feedback loops open. But probably the quote here is just to keep in mind is that people don't resist change. They resist being changed. And I do think that resistance sometimes is the hard part. And it's when folks can recognize how that change can be a benefit to them in the system that you get some more of that buy-in. Kevin, you probably have a shorter answer than I did right there.
It is one of those things that like, when there's a problem, we're going to solve it. The question is, are we going to solve the simple problem and make it where it is now hidden and we hope that nobody notices and it doesn't pop up again? Or are you going to say, you know what, let's dig in deep and make sure that we are engaging with families correctly, that we're hitting students first, and that our system is giving our teachers the support to be successful? And, yeah, you can do the individual corrective action, the district corrective action be done. You have to have that done in a year. You're done. Fine, great, move on. If you want to do cultural change with the way that we treat and work with our staff, how we work and treat with our parents, how special education and general education work together, it's going to take years.
Yep.
I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else have
it's not easy.
insight into that, have done? Yes.
I thought loud, so I'm special ed director speaking at a table at the IEP. So I don't know if that's addressing one of your questions. So for example, I have 1,700 kids with IEPs in my district. I maybe have 3% of my cases I consider hot cases, like I need to keep the pulse on. So if we have a meeting coming up that's probably going to be a tough one, I've already asked a lot of those questions to my team to make sure we have a strategy or a plan going in, because I never want, I mean, the parents already coming in with lots of frustration and questions and ambivalence, and I don't want the parent to see the school crosshairs with each other. It's like, they don't even know what they're, like, I want us to all be on the same page, whether we've done something wrong, something right, whatever. So I try to go over all those questions to assess the level of how bad is this situation on our end, and what solutions are we prepared to offer before we get to that point. But when I get a complaint, like my very first year, I got a complaint and I wanted to die. It's like, oh my gosh, this complaint is horrible. And now it's like, all right, it's a complaint. What is a valid issue that we didn't do? What is, I've met with this parent 4 times now in 4 weeks, and they're 2.5-hour meetings each time. The parent is always, they're at a different level. And so yes, we have a year for the corrective action item, but what do I need to put in place right now? And what is maybe one sentence I have to add in our procedural guide to address it? So I try to, I tell a parent they're upset, I'm like, you can file a complaint, like that is your right. But I care about the relationship that we're having in your child. And so, I let them know, yeah, that's your right. You can do that. I don't really care about that. I care about what we do with your kid. And how are they
I think what you highlight is just really critical there too. Technical change is much faster because it's not human, right? Like, policy, procedure, you're changing one line on something, you can go in, those usually are the real easy part. It is that human adaptive part of these pieces that are, that's where the time and investment is.
Yes, one start on that. So, there's a teacher shortage. Bad, it's really bad. And back in the day, to have a teacher that was great with the paperwork and great with instruction and relationships, you have a lot of that. Now, because of there's a shortage, and I'm telling this to all the dispute people, so, I don't mean to give away, all the things, but my philosophy has become, there are 40,000 ways to fail in an IEP, all things that are required, and one way to pass. I would much rather have that teacher have a good relationship with that child and that family and know how to teach the kid. Because if they're teaching that child and they're making progress, they're probably not going to have to teach you. Instead of, oh, is this error on the side, I'm not saying I don't care about that because that's important. But if I know that child is getting quality instruction from that teacher because of a good relationship with the family, that's really what we all want.
From a parent standpoint, if you have a good relationship with my kids making progress, then
You don't know who I complain about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like every little person, it's actually it's when you're in a meeting and they're so hung up on being so very compliant and not being heard. And you're like, no, we've got to read the whole thing for you. And I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And it's all about these other things. They're actually not doing. They're not building that relationship and they're not doing what's best for the student and they're not doing what is intended by the IEP being written. All the procedural things are there to get to the point where you are actually making progress and providing that student the correct, the teaching them what they need to learn and making progress. So that.
No. Very fair, true statement. Yes.
I appreciate this discussion and I really appreciate what you said about the 5 ways something breaks down, right? And the knowledge and skill are only 20% of the problem. So I work with a lot of families and see a lot of compliance complaints come through and say, oh, we're going to train. That's right. So we're praying about that one line that we're adding to the manual, but that does nothing to change people's motivation or belief in inclusion. And that is a much harder piece to build on. And don't talk enough about inclusion and about the stigma. And if we focused our energy there, to your point, on are they doing the right thing? Do they understand the child? Do they get that child? Because if you get a child, also parents, that's the most important thing. If you get my child and understand how they're going to learn, then I'm with you.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the hardest thing to teach and to put in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially-
Yeah, and I think I'll add just on to that and just building into this piece as well, because I think there is a reason why it's an IEP team, right? In terms of the changes to be implemented, like some of those are going, the weight of it's going to have to be carried by like the district, right? In terms of like those bigger systemic changes. But in thinking about the parents or thinking about the larger group of parents, as we think about all those other kids in Aiden's situation that may be impacted, this idea of moving beyond the hero model. And so I don't know if you've all seen this is Margaret Wheatley. And so the hero, one person, it's unsustainable. If you're trying to take on like these changes or you're looking at it and you're like, I'm going to solve a problem by myself, really, really tough. And, that is like pushing the boulder uphill, like, a huge boulder. Team is that collective responsibility. And to thinking about those interconnectedness to really be able to approach it. And so leaders, no matter where they sit in the system, right, as IEP teams, as folks come together, is that leaders know that hosting others is the only way to get complex, intractable problems solved. And that means and moving from hero to host means that it's not the hero knowing all the answers, being the only one that has the ideas for change, but rather you're hosting that discussion, you're hosting that problem solving. You're going from a place where you're asking questions to learn more about the problem. You're learning more about potential solutions to potentially actions to take for change, but moving beyond the hero model, which sometimes we see in different, especially tense actions, right? We've talked about complaints or we've talked about a situation where you can see a lot of issues, really thinking about this model too, of pushing forward. Kevin. Okay. So always like to do this before we leave today. You can just do it in your mind's eye, is just to reflect on your own system and just identify if there's a systemic question that you'd want to ask in the next month, right? Of kind of reflecting today. The reminder, hopefully it addresses a bundled problem. Most problems are bundled. So very rarely you have a technical and adaptive problem that kind of goes separately. Most of the times they're bundled, but again, the action for maybe a quick win, you address the technical piece as you're unpacking it, should be related to something that's an actual problem and should need additional information to come up with a possible solution. Again, that's just that reminder in thinking about problems and systemic questions is we're not leading with the solution in mind. This is a place for us to learn more as we're unraveling the mess, right? And we're trying to get to maybe what's at the heart or impacting what's at the bottom of our iceberg. I think that's it for us, Kevin. So last word.
I appreciate everyone sticking around and, showing up every day to do the good fight and do what's right for kids. So we appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you
you all. Appreciate y'all.
Good evening.